Joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, Punchbowl News co-founder, and MSNBC political contributor Jake Sherman, former Virginia congressman and former senior advisor on the January 6th Select Committee, Denver Riggleman, and senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, Elaine Kmark. So how much is this affecting Congress, Jake?
Well, it is to a large degree. I mean, this has taken over Capitol Hill in many respects. I mean, there's this discharge petition floating out, which needs to get 218 signatures. Once it gets 218 signatures, it basically opens the floor for a vote within a short period of time, 7 days, on the underlying Massey Conner resolution, which demands the release of the Epstein files. So we're all watching who signs that petition. Right now it's Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nancy Mace, Lauren Boebert, Tom Massey. I don't think I'm forgetting anyone there. And most Democrats so far, we assume every Democrat will sign. There's still two Republicans short, and Victoria Sparks of Indiana has indicated that she might sign it. The White House is heavily whipping against this, saying that the oversights investigation, which is in the hands of James Comer of Kentucky, is sufficient enough to achieve the ends that everybody is trying to achieve here. That's not enough for a lot of people, at least for Tom Massey and his crew. So, you know, the leadership was hoping, the Republican leadership was hoping that they would go home for August recess and this would go away. It hasn't gone away. That press conference today contributed a lot to that. The fact that, you know, there's the discharge petition, there's another resolution which just passed the House floor, a meaningless resolution from the leadership. It's pretty all-consuming, although, listen, there's other things going on, of course. There'll be government funding and a whole host of other legislative items, but it's taking up a lot of oxygen.
So here's what I wonder, Jake. It's a couple of different things. One is the pressure. Is it coming from the women who are speaking out on the Capitol steps? Is it coming from a genuine belief that there is a conspiracy there and they want to get to the bottom of it and that DOJ or maybe even Donald Trump is hiding it? Or is it coming from, you know, constituents directly reaching out to them? Do they hear about it in the town halls? What is the pressure?
The latter two, Katie. I think it's number one, that constituents are talking about it, and that ties into number two, that they believe, Republicans have been saying for years, not us, not, you know, anybody else saying it. They have been saying that this is a massive conspiracy, and Jeffrey Epstein was involved. I mean, yesterday, Anna Paulina Luna came out from a briefing with survivors and said she believed that Jeffrey Epstein was an asset working for a foreign adversary that does not like the United States. I mean, this is what Republicans have been saying for years. Donald Trump indicated he would release these documents. They believed him. They thought Donald Trump would release these documents, whether he said it directly or not. And now he's not. So constituents are angry. I mean, listen, the survivor press conference and the briefing was just yesterday. This has been going, or yesterday and today. This has been going on for longer than that. So this is kind of baked in. This is constituents. This is, you know, it's a whole thing, Katie, and it's difficult to unwind.
Say if the discharge petition does not work, does Massey or does Lauren Boebert or does MTJ, do they gum up the works in some other way?
It's tough to say. Now, the discharge petition, Katie, is a relatively straightforward process. You get 218 signatures. This goes to the floor. So if it doesn't work, they can't really blame anyone but their colleagues. It's not the leadership's fault that it doesn't work, although they are whipping against it. They could gum up the works in a majority this small. Anyone can gum up the works.
Yeah.
And by the way, Katie, it's important to just note that discharge petitions before this Congress were extraordinarily rare. They rarely work. They rarely get close to working. But two things. There's a very tight Republican majority, and people are not happy how Mike Johnson is handling the House of Representatives on a couple of fronts. That's why it is working.
So here's the interesting conundrum, or just the argument that I guess the needle, excuse me, that Republicans are threading Denver. On the one hand, they're saying the House is going to take care of this. Don't worry, they're going to get everything. But on the other hand, saying don't vote to get everything because that's too much. But don't worry, they're going to get everything. I don't really understand why they're saying trust the House, but don't vote for Massey's discharge.
Well, I think, listen, Jake's right about the discharge petition. They don't work very often, but this is a brutal one Because right now, if you're not signing the discharge position, that means that you really are against any type of release of the Epstein files in a redacted way. That's all that means. And once Thomas, I mean, I know Tom Massey, and we don't agree on a lot of things, but once he finds his true north, he's not going to stop. You talk about gumming up the works. You're talking about throwing in amendments. You're already going to have this shutdown of government. So I don't know what they're going to do. But once you start seeing these type of things, I know if it was me and I was standing next to Tom and to Roe, I'd be looking at what can we do outside of the discharge position, maybe on amendments to gum up the works, or to even go out into the media and say, listen, if you're not supporting this discharge petition, you're supporting child rapists and pedophiles. That's really what this is. There's no way to there's no way to really rationalize it other than that. The other thing is this. I think what you're seeing, too, is when you're seeing Tom Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, big conspiracy theories. Jake referred to that also. The problem they're having is that more than 8 months ago, they ran that the deep state and globalists and Democrats were in the Epstein files. That's what they ran against. And now 8 months later, they still haven't released it. There's only one thing that the American public is going to surmise from this, and that Trump's in the files. And that's why they will never release anything unredacted. Even if this discharge petition goes through, there's going to be a fight on executive privilege. There's going to be a war against releasing those documents. They're not coming out. They're not coming out unredacted. And I think that's going to hurt the Republicans awfully in the 2026 midterm.
Well, it's going to test whether the Republicans are really for exposing what's behind these files, or if they just really love Donald Trump and are unwilling to put him in that position. It's going to expose it. We're going to find out one way or the other. Lisa, the House says they're getting a lot of information. They've released a bunch of files, a bunch of documents, tapes. Is it new stuff? Have we learned anything new? They said thousands of pages of materials.
Thousands of pages of materials, Katie, is really not all that much stuff. We used to have a rule when I was litigator that about 3,000 pages fits in a standard banker's box. So if you're thinking about what the production is physically, about 10 boxes worth of materials, that's not all that much. That's certainly not 300 gigabytes of data, which is what the Department of Justice itself said it had, and the memorandum that was unsigned and released in July. But where are they going to get a lot of things? I suspect from the estate. The estate has made repeated public statements, including to me, that they will comply with all lawful process. They're going to comply with the subpoena. The subpoena has a deadline of September 8th, which is next week. Do I expect that the estate will turn over everything that they have next week? No, but I think it will begin some sort of rolling production from the estate in which they start to turn over some of the low-hanging fruit. And you'll remember as well as I do that Brad Edwards, who we saw at that press conference today, was on with our colleague Lawrence O'Donnell and said that he understood that the estate has that birthday book with the alleged letter from Donald Trump. If it's in there, if that letter is part of the birthday book and the estate has the birthday book, we should expect to at least hear that it was produced relatively
Trump,
soon.
I mean, we know that he's in the files because there's been reporting about him being in the files. He's also friends with him. He's been public about the relationship. I'm just confused why he thinks that he can't survive, if he thinks he can't survive any release of it, any release of whatever he might be in these files.
Well, obviously, we don't know the totality of how Donald Trump is mentioned in these files.
Yeah.
But again, his own Department of Justice has said that based on their review of these files, there was nothing upon which they could predicate a new criminal investigation. At the very least, even if it's embarrassing to him, it's certainly not something that his Department of Justice has said was criminal from him or anyone else. He should be able to survive it. I don't know why he's so afraid.
This is the danger on campaigning on a conspiracy theory and exposing it. It is hard to believe that when they get into office, suddenly they're all going to be more mindful of the judicial process, of the legal process, not suddenly mindful of not wanting to put people in the uncomfortable position of being named but not charged, and then letting those conspiracies float out there. I mean, they certainly have done it to other people. Elaine, and this is where I think the Democrats, it's worth asking this. Are the Democrats playing with fire here?
It's hard to tell. I mean, what's interesting about this is you have the right wing, the MAGA people holding on to this conspiracy theory all through the campaign. They win. Pam Bondi comes into office and she says, I've got the client book on my desk. And then it turns out there is no client book. So all of a sudden, this is shifted to Trump. And why is he doing this? I mean, nobody can quite figure this out. Why is he doing this? The Democrats are all behind getting the papers out, getting the files out, but Trump isn't. So that's one thing. The second thing is, if you listen to that press conference this morning, the young women, or they're now middle-aged women, in that press conference said that they are going to compose their own client book. They're the ones that know who they were trafficked to, if in fact they were trafficked to anybody. They will compose their own book. So this is kind of let a monster out of the closet here, and I think it's not going to be good for Trump, because he definitely looks like he's hiding something, and it's not going to be good for really anybody.
Political analyst and Democratic strategist Cornell Belcher and former Republican Congressman of Pennsylvania, Charlie Dent.
Cornell, you know how you know?
I don't know where he's going.
Excited for it, though.
This is a load of crock.
How's that?
Because if the good Governor Landry had such a problem in New Orleans or Shreveport, what the hell have you been doing all this time as governor?
Right. Is the National Guard under his purview?
And the National Guard is under his purview. So why do you need Donald Trump to come into your state to get the National Guard to deal with your crime problem? And if that's the case, then why the hell are you governor? Because you haven't done the job. You've allowed this to fester under your watch. And you're so incompetent at this point that you need the help of the President of the United States to validate your incompetency. So I don't understand. Help me understand what I'm missing, because as a former lieutenant governor of a state, I know damn well that if it's happening on my watch in Baltimore or Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, that's on us. And if we're calling the president to come in, then we really messed some stuff up.
Yeah. Well, I think you're on to something, but I don't think it's about crime, right? If you,
no, it's not about crime.
I don't think it's about crime.
No.
Newsflash, I don't think it's about crime. Look, if you look at, this is classic politics, right? If you look at the Wall Street Journal poll that was out just yesterday. Wall Street Journal, not necessarily a bastion of liberalism, right? Their poll finds stunning economic angst happening in this country, where more and more Americans are thinking the American dream is moving away from them. They think the economy is growing worse, not necessarily better, and they're thinking, behold, that the leaders in Washington actually aren't perhaps up for the job, right? So the economic angst is growing. People are really concerned about the economy. And this was someone who was supposed to fix the economy overnight. So the economy is going wrong. Let me change the subject.
Right.
Let me go back to what is tried and true in this country since this country was founded, and let's pull out boogeymen to scare people and change the subject, because and nothing works more effectively as a boogeyman than the specter of black crime in urban America.
Well, this is very true.
And in his case, black crime with the companion of immigration.
With the companion of immigration. And I mean, I think that's the point for me, Charlie. One, we have long said at this table that Donald Trump is going to start by targeting black mayors in Democratic states that have Democratic governors, but it's not going to stop there. Like, the mayor of Shreveport, Louisiana, is actually a Republican. At one point, he was a Democrat, but like a different mayor, right? So it's switched back and forth. But I do think that Donald Trump is kind of treating the National Guard as like his own police force, and you couple that with what they have done with ICE, injecting billions of dollars into their budget. HSI, the vests that people see here in Washington, D.C., that they saw in Louisiana, that they saw in L.A., that they may see in Louisiana, that they're probably going to see in Chicago, those HSI vests, that's Homeland Security investigations, coupled with some ICE people. Who do they really work for, and what do they really do? So I do think that this is a pretext for his authoritarian overreach, because I really just think this is all about the election. Because what Cornell's saying about the economy is right. People are very unhappy, but maybe I have it wrong.
Well, the politics of this is all scrambled. I have never met a mayor. I represented an urban area as a Republican, city of Allentown, Bethlehem. And every mayor I ever wanted, they wanted federal support for law enforcement. They didn't want the National Guard to come in, but they wanted the COPS grants funded. And I was in a minority of House Republicans who supported the COPS grants. Many of my Republican colleagues were wanting to cut the COPS grants. And because the Republican argument at the time by many was, law enforcement is a state and local function, not a federal function. But the truth is, mayors around the country for years and some governors have wanted more federal support for good reason.
Yeah, they want the money.
Yeah, I mean, even in D.C., okay, where arguably the president has some authority to deploy the Guard, the mayor's been a little bit more muted here because carjackings are down. Maybe we're going to learn something, but I don't know. This is a totally. I'm concerned about posse comitatus out in L.A. I mean, deploying the Marines. Well, I can see why a judge found that to be unlawful. It's a violation of posse comitatus. So we're in a really strange place. But as Michael pointed out, most mayors are not going to want to, or governors are going to want to deploy the Guard because they're going to acknowledge that maybe they haven't been able to manage things on their own.
Right.
These mayors, they don't want to admit failure. But we have a crime problem in a lot of places.
But also, the Guard, though, the Guard is not trained to do crime prevention, and they're not police.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is out with a new warning to countries willing to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine. He told the Russian Economic Forum that he opposes any deployment of Western troops in Ukraine, calling them legitimate targets.
Regarding possible military contingents in Ukraine, this is one of the root causes trying to involve Ukraine in NATO. So if any troops appear there, especially during the ongoing hostilities, we assume they'll be legitimate targets for defeat.
Targets for defeat. 2 weeks ago, President Trump gave his Russian counterpart yet one more 2-week deadline to advance peace talks with Ukraine. That deadline, like so many Trump deadlines before it, has now come and gone. There is no indication this White House is ready to impose new costs on Russia. Joining me now is Max Bergman. He's the director of the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Max, good to have you. First question.
Great to be with you.
As Putin calls foreign troops in Ukraine targets to defeat, is he threatening to attack NATO troops?
I think that's exactly what it sounds like. And I think this sort of notion of Europeans sending forces into Ukraine to reassure the Ukrainians and to monitor a ceasefire was simply never going to be accepted by Russia. And Vladimir Putin simply just confirmed that. Now, I think part of what Europe is trying to do is send a signal to Donald Trump that they have skin in the game and are willing to back the Ukrainians. But I think what we've just witnessed from Putin is that we're a long way away from there being any sort of ceasefire or any sort of peace agreement, and that he would see any Europeans that are on the ground, any European forces, as essentially NATO in Ukraine. And for him, that would mean he would have lost the war because he's trying to stop Ukraine from really not just joining NATO, but essentially joining Europe and experiencing a European future. So it's not a huge surprise that he said this, but I think it is rather clarifying.
Isn't it yet one more sign that Russia and Ukraine, frankly, are nowhere close to an agreement, right? Because Ukraine wants security guarantees for any peace agreement, and they just don't trust Russia, so they'll want some sort of European participation there. And if Putin is saying he can't live with that, where do you see the outlines of a workable deal at this point?
No, I don't see a workable outline. It reminds me a bit like when I just picked up my kid from school, spun him around on the merry-go-round, was all excited. He got a little dizzy, got a little sick. And, when he got off at exactly the same spot that he got on. And all the sort of 6 months of talks have basically been a distraction from what's actually happening on the front line, which is Russia is making gains. U.S. weapons deliveries to Ukraine are declining because the United States is not going back to Congress to ask for more money. And the president is not prioritizing aid to Ukraine. And so we have a situation where Vladimir Putin thinks that he's winning the war and that if the war goes on for another 6 months or a year, that the Ukrainian military might break. So I think where we are is this war is just continuing. And a lot of the diplomatic talks that are happening are just that. They're talks and not really resulting in any sort of meaningful concessions really by the Russian side. And so I think we're looking at a war that's just going to continue on.
What is the significance then of not just Putin, but also President Trump putting the blame on Europe to some degree for slowing progress towards peace?
Well, I don't really see how Europe's at fault here, particularly when President Trump cut the Europeans out of any sort of peace negotiations in the beginning part of this process. I think what he came into office believing was that Ukraine was at fault for this war, and that if he put pressure on the Ukrainians, as he did in that terrible Oval Office meeting, that that would get Ukraine to agree to a ceasefire. But the real aggressor in this war is Russia. They're the ones bombing Ukrainian cities constantly and engaged right now in a ground offensive against the Ukrainians. And he has not shown really any willingness to throw the book at Russia. He has threatened sanctions against India, or tariffs against India, but that has not resulted in India buying less Russian oil. And he's not really committed to providing Ukraine with weapons. He's agreed to sell some weapons to the Europeans to then sell to the Ukrainians. But what we're seeing is the United States gradually quitting on this war and pulling back. And that is leaving Ukraine, I think, shorthanded. And it's also meaning that the Europeans are really stepping up, and they are stepping up to support Ukraine. But it means that Russia thinks it can win this war. Why do you agree to peace terms when you still think you can win this war? It's sort of the opposite of what President Trump has said that he would do, which is peace through strength. And we're basically seeing the U.S. Pull out and looking very weak in this conflict.
Yeah, and that's a gift certainly to Putin. Max Bergman, thanks so much for joining.